I think that it's really important that you guys understand kind of what your unique role is in the conservation movement right now. And for those of us that have been around the conservation movement for a few years, we've seen some changes. It's not as controversial as it used to be. Everybody wants fishing for their kids and their future, and aquatic resources are seen as very important, and people understand that they really are threatened. And so as we sort of move away from this historical confrontational conservation era, we move into a collaborative conservation era. And I think you guys have a really important key position, especially with the work you do tying federal and state agencies together, and you have a real need for more effective ways to involve private groups and individuals and communities really into collaborative conservation. So I really am excited to work with you, and I think we've really, it's been great to sort of get to know some of you at the workshop this January. For those of you who weren't at the workshop, this is what I look like. But for those of you that were, you'll know that we are already working together to do some ongoing peer assistance through the Fish Habitat Partnership Excellence Project. And part of that work is this webinar, and we'll have a couple of more. So please feel free to contact me afterwards. We have set up the Basecamp, which I think everybody is aware of, where the documents associated with the presentation today are going to be located. So what have we learned so far? You guys have a unique role. Great. That gives you unique problems. Right now, we haven't got a lot of information about what sort of leveraging resources you're doing. I know you're doing a lot of unique leveraging of resources. It doesn't really show up in your budgets per se. So what we saw from the information you self-reported at the end of last year was a universe of groups, of the 18 groups, where the annual budget of the individual group seems relatively small. It seems that most groups are pretty heavily reliant on federal grants, but that you have a lot of people involved at the steering committee level. Having 14 solid steering committee members is a really important asset. We asked a question about how many adults are coming to your activities or receiving your newsletter. The numbers we collected there seem really pretty small, and I think that that's where there's a huge amount of potential for you guys to do more outreach, get more donors, get more partner groups that are participating financially, and really a lot of room to grow. So I guess it's not news to you that fundraising is not, the first thing on most scientists' list of favorite things to do. But most of what you're doing is really under the radar right now of the American public, and you guys have a really important role to get out there and let people know what it is that you are doing, and try to diversify your fundraising. So that's kind of where we left things, I think, at the last workshop when we got together in January. Here's just kind of another take at what we saw in terms of current diversification of funding sources in the partnerships. And so the first big lump, state, federal, and government grants. Some partnerships have 0, and others are 100%. You saw the median was 95. So there are individual partnerships that have done well in particular areas. I was surprised that no group really mentioned having any of the NGO partners actually contributing directly to the partnerships, although some of them are led by NGO partners. So I think there's a certain amount of off-budget leveraging that's going on that we couldn't really see from those statistics. Usually when we talk about financial diversity, we talk about different types of sources, different funds within those sources, like, federal grants. There's a number of different funds we'll be talking about. Different approaches to those sources. There's project grants versus general support grants. Those are different approaches to asking for funds. And then, of course, also the diversity of individuals that are out there representing your organization and fundraising for your organization contributes to overall financial diversification of your group. And since you have so many different groups within your partnership, I think there's a great potential to get more people involved. So each group is out there exploring options, some working on corporate sponsorship, some working on individual donor strategies with a lot of varied successes. And I know, we talked about some of those in January, and hopefully we can follow up with more of, what's working for fish habitat partnerships right now in this discussion. But in general, when you look at these varied sources, there's some trade-offs. Flexibility, unrestricted funding on the right side of this chart, more predictability on the upper level in general. Government project grants are considered more restricted and less predictable than other funding sources, at least for most NGOs. You guys are in something of a unique position because you have ongoing authorization for or ongoing funding, if not, solid authorization for your program. So it's not unusual for NGOs to say we want to have more individual members because we need to have more unrestricted funding or more predictability in our renewal programs that will continue to have ongoing funding. So I found something that I wanted to share with you guys, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with the Lincoln Institute, but they did a report not too long ago about the landscape conservation collaboratives and options for funding those. They kind of went through and noticed where collaborative conservation was listed actually as something that agencies were doing, and it won't surprise you guys what the big funders are. USDA, Department of Interior, EPA, and NOAA were the ones that they identified as the largest federal funders of collaborative conservation. They also identified some long-term issues that are worth looking at. I know you guys are working towards getting more federal funding, and that's something that is certainly important. But there are some limitations to what you can do with that, and they identified a number of issues that at least the LCCs were facing, and as the aquatic equivalent of the LCCs, I think each of you have found some of these limitations. It's great when you can meet your match requirements, for example. It would be wonderful if you could get multi-year funding. That seems really hard to do. And there's just so much emphasis on project-specific grants rather than governance and planning and monitoring type of funds that I know all of you need. And then kind of the bottom line is that there's a problem with telling a funder, we need you to come give us money because the federal government isn't big enough and we've lost our federal funding and we need private sources. That's not seen as a compelling message for most private funders. They don't feel that they're ever big enough to fill the gaps the federal government leaves behind. And so your work becomes how do you develop a message that you can convey in a business plan to make your program more compelling for private funding sources. So that means, okay, how do you make your program compelling? What would success look like for you guys? If you have muted yourself, please unmute yourself. really want to hear a little bit more from you about what you want out of a business plan.
Well, Wendy, I can start out. I mean, again, I may cover a little bit more of this later in the session, but you know, you've kind of covered it. I mean, essentially, we want to be able to diversify our portfolio of revenue sources. So that's that's one of the two focuses of our business planning effort, is to develop strategies that will diversify that portfolio revenue. The other is to have a suite of implementation strategies on how we would spend any new funds that we bring into the partnership, and that would include staffing, seeding dollars for projects, maximizing funding to our priority projects, and then testing, analyzing, and reporting of project outcomes. So that's where we are initially anyways.
Great, thanks, Steve. You guys, it looks like you have, at the Eastern Brook Trout joint venture, you have, you know, your eyes are a little bit bigger than your current income.
Yes, and again, started off, you know, more or less from an operational standpoint, you know, things were being done through in-kind services and things along that lines in conjunction with whatever federal funding we were able to be successful in receiving. But now we've gotten to a point where the operations are large enough that, you know, just recently the partnership decided to establish a full-time coordinator, and we have some science and data needs that are well beyond our means to try to just accomplish that through in-kind services, or just leveraging what we can with other regional groups. So
are other people on the phone looking for more money to do new things, or just maintaining existing budgets?
This is Robin.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as everybody knows, we hired a year and a half ago Erica Stock to be what we call our director for strategic partnerships. And so we were taking the approach that, yes, we would eventually like to get more money for operations, but also we were looking for more project dollars. And I think, Erica's not on the call, but I would have to say that it's been a difficult process to put together all the little bits and pieces that we needed to approach potential supporters. Number one, if we are funded by federal grant money, we always have to be careful how we state what we're doing, because I think there's some restrictions on, you know, asking for money directly if you're using a federal grant to pay your salaries. So we're always looking for support. We've learned that the language that we have to use is opportunities for support, that when we approach different people. There's a certain amount of official documentation that you have to have in place. It helps, number one, if you have a banker, you know, a foundation, somebody who can receive the money. But if you do have a banker, then that banker has to be able to provide certain forms and other paperwork to potential donors if they ask for it. We had to develop what we call profit loss statements that we update every 3 months, an extremely detailed budget that shows all the different ways we have spent our money and who the other existing partners and donors to the program are. So all of that takes a fair amount of time. We have found, and I think and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation would be the first to agree, is that it has been fairly difficult to get people, big donors, foundations, to work on fishy projects, especially at the local level. We've had some success working with fly fishing industry folks that have donated just a maximum of $5,000 several times from the Orvis company, for example. They are interested in working with local levels. We have to compete against Trout Unlimited for funding, and the approach that we're taking under the OFLA grant that we have right now is to try and develop a more collaborative approach where if Trout Unlimited and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and Winter are all working on trying to conserve, say, Yellowstone cutthroat trout in the upper Missouri River Basin, what we're trying to do is to get all three of us to be able to determine what the priorities are and then use that groups that are working on the ground to approach potential supporters. So it's an interesting road to hoe, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. So success for you includes success for those key partners and making sure that all of you have an integrated business plan, essentially. You have to be not competing, but collaborating.
Right. Exactly. And we'll know by the end of this year whether that's going to work or not. I hope, through the approach we're taking.
Mm-hmm. So Lisa sends a note about becoming a nonprofit. Some of the question is discuss, what Robin is discussing is some of the core required elements of becoming an established nonprofit. Yeah, even if you don't take that actual step, there are these sort of turf issues and need to work with your partners. The whole concept of collaborative conservation suggests that perhaps everybody's working together and everyone has a same self-interest, which I don't think is necessarily true. I think that you guys are exploring how to make that work best and how to use relationships you have from, say, working with Trout Unlimited or the Nature Conservancy to establish those kind of mutual beneficial relationships. So one of the first things, I was just saying, is it has to be compelling and urgent. Well, if everyone is just agreeing to all get along and, you're emphasizing that collaboration, it doesn't necessarily mean that the work isn't urgent, but it means you have to maybe change your language about it and how why is there an urgent need for your particular piece of that work to help and enhance the others. Deanna, have you any other thoughts on some of those issues?
Nothing in particular I would add at this point, to be honest.
Okay, well, let me show you a little bit about what Deanna and I have learned about working with groups and how to write it all down and the value of putting it in one document. We worked with 150 nonprofit watershed level groups over a course of 3 years and measured their success in a number of different ways: what the size of their staff is, what their budget was, how many volunteers they had, and the number of donors that they had. And we were trying to see how we could diversify and what growth in those areas correlated to in terms of how we could assist them. And what we found is the most important thing we could do for them, number one, actually, was to make sure they had an annual operating plan. After that, the actual success and growth in the organization seemed to be very tightly related to whether or not they had a fundraising plan written down. And when I say written down, I mean, not just on somebody's desk, but one that they could actually share with their board, share with their partners, send to us as consultants and say, this is our fundraising plan. So this was really important for us to find out, how we could be most successful. And, we're calling it fundraising planning because of the unique situation that you're in as collaborative partnerships and working within federal dollars. You can call it business planning. It's essentially the same process. So there's a number of constraints on collaborative, on working with federal grants for collaborative conservation. Not calling it a fundraising plan seems like the least of them. So I really want to encourage you to get it written down. Whatever you call it probably isn't as important as the fact that you have something that you can point to and say, this is what we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish. So are you ready for that? Here's a little checklist of assets that I think you need to get started. Most of you have a strong leadership group, as we said, with your steering committees. Steve was talking about putting together a budget and perhaps some project budgets for different things that aren't currently in the budget but would be for the future, and getting out there and doing some prospect research. That needs to be done really before you sit down to do a fundraising plan. What I want to give you today is a couple of financial templates and overall structure for doing this. But what I can't give you in a webinar, and what you guys I know are working on, is your own message template. What do you want people to do? What is the call to action that you want to convey? And hanging on to your key factoids, your key words that you're going to repeat over and over again, and even specific graphics, not just a logo, but this is a picture of what it is we're trying to accomplish. And make sure you have that message template thought through. And of course, making sure you have your team up to the point where they can feel confident in what they're doing. If you need one-on-one assistance for coaching or board training, doing that in advance so that people feel like they're ready to move forward. So I guess I think you're ready. I think a lot of people on this phone are. I think you can do it. I think that for the next few minutes, I just wanted to focus on prospecting and private funding sources so that we make sure we include that in the mix. The obvious, in the federal government, what is the size of the federal government, the federal budget these days? I can't say. But in the private sector, the giving pot has kind of been about the same for a number of years. If there's $303 billion of private contributions being made in America, only about 3% of that goes to conservation causes. The first and most successful group of nonprofits are churches, followed by universities and education. So, 3% of 303 billion, what is that, about $9 billion a year maybe going to conservation causes from private sources. I think there is a reasonable opportunity for you guys to include private sources in your portfolio because that's just a huge pot, and what you're asking for isn't that much. Okay, if we look at the Bird joint ventures, 25 years, they've invested $5 billion. To me, that statement sounds compelling. $5 billion, and they've conserved 17.3 million acres of critical habitat. Whatever the metric is, I think that's a good, simple example of how you can phrase what it is the overall fish habitat partnerships are trying to do and what your piece of it is. And I think there's really a lot of room to diversify into this pot. And the big question is, what's the biggest piece of this pot? The individuals, the blue section of this chart. And I know very few of the groups have really developed detailed plans for how to get to individuals, but obviously that's an important piece that eventually we're going to have to crack. It's a huge slice of the pie that's out there. And even if you don't right now have an individual donor strategy, how many people are attracting volunteers? You guys have a lot of volunteers, and the one thing we know about Americans is that they not only give to belong, but they volunteer to belong. And if you have volunteers that are participating in fish habitat efforts, there's no reason why you shouldn't be keeping track of them. Even if you don't have a donor program right now, you want to have a list of prospects that you can reach out to and people that support your cause. It's not just, of course, knowing who, but also the fact that you do actually ask them. And that is the number one overriding reason people give money to any cause, is because they were specifically asked by someone. I think that no one goes, oh gosh, I really need to have a tax write-off, perhaps on December 31st. Some of us think like that. But then you look back through the pile of requests that you have, or the opportunities that you have right then, and if you don't ask, you won't be in that pile. So when we do fundraising planning with groups, we say, what are the best ways to ask? And really the financial potential of your organization is really simple math. It's the number of prospects you have times the number of times you're going to ask them and the effectiveness of how you ask them. As a Girl Scout, I went out there face-to-face, made personal face-to-face requests of people to buy cookies. Those cookies were of a known quality and a known price. And the Girl Scout has a known reputation, so it's pretty simple. But unless you get the Girl Scout out there doing that face-to-face request with a 50% return rate, the math doesn't work very well. So you don't see much direct mail prospecting for Girl Scout cookie sales. The math just doesn't work real well. So if you know the price of your cookies and how you're going to ask people and the number of times you're going to ask, then basically, that is the skeleton of the financial piece of it. The next section of this presentation, I wanted to talk a little bit more about templates and the words that go around those numbers. And, that's the part that really depends on who your audience is, and, that influences what you want to put in your business plan. So you're going to have a unique format. It's going to include some specific answers and numbers and keywords. And then it's all going to come together in some sort of a document. What does that document look like for you guys? Any thoughts on what should be in your business plan?
not sure. This is Steve Perry. I'm not sure I think you may be getting into it later, but I mean, I had access to the FHP business plan outline, and so we borrowed heavily on that. As I had indicated in an earlier conversation with you, Wendy, we were fortunate. The Eastern Brook Trout Joint Venture was fortunate. We had some of our newer steering committee members who have experience in establishing nonprofit organizations, take a look at that, and so they're familiar with business models and business planning. They took a look at the template and felt that it was an excellent approach to take, and so we're starting out using that as kind of our template where we're trying to state our case, and there's a number of areas to be covered under that. We are going to be involved in analyzing who our prospective supporters are and what their needs and demands would be. Get involved in a gap analysis that essentially would be taking a look at the other groups that are providing similar programs or services in our geographic area, and make the case of why our approach is needed in the mix. Certainly a section on communicating and how we'll reach our target audiences and turn those into revenue sources. And then the last three components would be, the leadership coordination, describing roles and responsibilities, a specific section on our financial plan, and then lastly, looking at evaluation and assessment. How are we going to monitor and evaluate meeting our ultimate intent of a business plan.
Okay, well, maybe I should go to that template. Just we can come back to some discussion here. People want to see that. This again is on Basecamp. I put the documents up yesterday, I believe, and really basic 8 key areas that we're covering. And as Steve was saying, part of that is about, who's the audience. That's the most important thing to do, keep in mind when you're starting out here is, you're not probably going to a banker asking for a loan. And when business plans are written, generally that's the audience, is a banker and showing a return on investment. So we have a little bit of prospect research and thinking that has to go into, who are you going to be showing this to? And sometimes, just a little brochure, a little PDF of a brochure might be all that your audience wants to see rather than some large document about how great your work is. So your unique format needs to include a little bit of these 8 things, but it doesn't necessarily have to go into depth on everything. Key to that, of course, is the audience and why do they care. And, I just want to keep bringing you guys back to the unique role of the partnerships and the coordination around the performance criteria that you're putting together and the leveraging resources towards your priorities. And who cares about that? That's the unique thing that you guys do. And when you're looking for supporters, you have to be able to explain why that unique role should be mattering to them. And that, is really unique to each of you and what the resource is that you're trying to protect. Finally, the specific needs. How much money do you really need? Having narratives for the projects and a realistic budget for those projects. So let me just show you a couple other things that we put up on Basecamp for you to work with. And this is just the first section of a larger spreadsheet that you'll see there. even if you don't have members and events and individual donors, there's other parts of this spreadsheet down below that, we have additional rows for government grants and collaborations, and there's outline columns for who and who does what and what it's going to cost. But this is just a Excel spreadsheet to help you do the simple math. The first and most important thing that goes in is your last year's information, like how much did you raise last year? How many people do you have coming to your events? And what are your strategies for reaching out to them? So it's organized by sources. It's you can add a row for whatever new events you want to add or campaigns, fundraising campaigns, and keep growing your own spreadsheet. Then I also put up on Basecamp a 3-year template, which has just different tabs for the years, and then a summary page so that you can show individual prospects how much you have raised, what your goals are for the future, and talk to your board or your steering committee about it. Really important to set those goals. You'll see up at the top here, this organization had some goals to increase overall budgets by 5% for a couple of years, maybe 10% in the third year, and then to do that, they were going to have to look at which sources they could ramp up accordingly. So as you go through your 3-year time period, your annual results are entered into this kind of a spreadsheet, and you can adaptively manage your fundraising plan based on your results. So I know Steve's been talking a little bit. I wanted to also bring up the Pacific Marine Estuary and Habitat Partnership. Lisa is out there, and she has a great new strategic action plan that I posted to Basecamp yesterday as well. And I know she wants to speak and talk about how she did this, but she cannot speak today. So I am going to channel some words of wisdom from Lisa, and she will perhaps be able to give us some other thoughts by the chat box here. But just walk through kind of what she learned from this. Lisa says that when she first started doing this, the partnership was just at a point where they had adopted their strategic framework, and the steering committee wanted an operational plan to implement it, and that it just happened very quickly that they see the need for that, and even as the ink was drying on the strategic framework, they set out to do this strategic action plan. It ended up being about 10 pages long with a simple operating budget at the back, and really the audience for this was going to be NIMPS and Weve and some of the internal partners, at least to hear what their key messages are going to be and how kind of the pieces fit together. So Lisa had a leadership team, a governance committee of 5 people that worked with her on it, and you'll see that when you read it, there's some important themes of focusing on passage, focusing on water quality, and those are tied to the prospect research that Lisa had done, so she was really looking for prospects that were interested in passage and water quality, fish passage and water quality. But since it's such a huge area of the country, 13 states and a good portion of the Pacific Ocean, really focusing on that unique niche of convening and facilitating and prioritizing critical actions. There's more to come in the FMEP Strategic Action Plan. It's a living document, and I know that Lisa says she was looking for more specifics over, on projects, exactly who's going to do what and how, and including leverage resources in there as well. So please read over what Lisa's done. I think it's a great example. And I don't know, Lisa, if you want to chat anything else or if people have any specific questions for you.
Lisa did just write something in the box.
Oh, yeah?
The original version actually included prospect names, but those were omitted from the final version of the report. Lisa, I don't know if you can talk any more about that. Was it simply just not to share those publicly because it's more internal information? I would assume that you're continuing to work off that prospect list in your fundraising.
Yeah, I think that makes a good sense. For public distribution, you don't need to name names, but for internal use, of course, you have that information. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Steve, well, Lisa's typing some more. Yeah.
If your voice doesn't come back, you're going to get a lot faster at your typing, I think, Lisa.
So let me turn this over to Steve for a few minutes, too, on how Eastern Brook Trout Joint Venture is proceeding. And what have you learned, Steve?
Well, it just as quick background, one of my responsibilities as the coordinator was to essentially establish an operational budget for the partnership, and in the past, we've kind of been reactive to grant opportunities and never took the time to sit down and kind of map out what we felt our needs were. So I presented a draft budget to the steering committee last week where the figures in the draft budget were derived from, an average for those particular budget need areas over 4 or 5 different grants that we had received since we began our operation as a partnership. And so they're not really, other than maybe just the EBT, except for the coordinator, the others aren't really, and the annual meeting, the others aren't tied to specific needs. They're just generally what was spent on those type of activities or those type of needs in the past. Just to kind of give an indication to the steering committee, what our base needs might look like, and then of course compare that to what we currently have available to us through the essentially only one funding source at this point, which is the multi-state conservation grant. Just to make them aware of our needs to initiate a business planning process and to try to establish a diversity of funding sources to meet the needs. I think it's going to help us get down into the weeds a little bit more to understand what it is we're trying to accomplish under each of these components of the budget, particularly from the science and data standpoint, as well as the website, because again, we're working with the Appalachian LCC and now SARP. All 3 of our websites are hosted in one location, even though they're separate websites, but they're more than just outreach tools. I mean, it's a data management tool and a portal where people can access data. And so we're still, in the development phase, so there is some needs there. So at any rate, that's what kind of set the table. Got the steering committee to understand that, we really need to take a planned approach. We've done a great job in establishing our strategic conservation priorities, but have not really delved into this whole world of developing a financial development plan. And so the steering committee established a 5-person business planning committee. There are 4 steering committee members who signed up for that task, and I'm also working with that group as well. We've been delving into the world of the realm of business planning. That's not something that I had a whole lot of knowledge about, and so using these training opportunities as well as doing some research and finding some reference sources that kind of will help set the table is where we're at this point. So it was interesting to understand the difference between a business model and a business plan. So it appears all of us have a business model, whether we're able to describe it or not is a key issue, and so I think this process would help us sit down and basically write on paper, how we integrate our conservation priorities with our financial needs, and so and how we intend to meet those financial needs. So a good next step for all of us, I think.
So help me out here. A business model is we don't really.
Well, the way I'm trying to figure it out, a business model is an integration of your mission impact strategies with your financial viability strategies. And so it's an integration of both, and I think we spend a lot of time on what we intend to do from a conservation impact perspective, without spending a whole lot of time on describing what our financial viability strategies are. And so, as I understand it, and again, it may be a rudimentary understanding, that integrating those two is what represents your business model.
Mm-hmm. So knowing where your impact is and
how you're going to support that impact financially.
Yeah.
But
and who cares about that impact, for example, and what funding opportunities are there?
Yeah, and having successful impact strategies, conservation impact strategies, along with your financial viability strategies is what brings about sustainability.
Yeah. Okay, well, I need to move on in the hope that we can finish up quickly here at the top of the hour, but Steve put together a couple of external resources that he found helpful in his preliminary quest on this. So the whole discussion of models versus plans, I think National Council of Nonprofits is a great place to look. Also want to encourage you guys to become River Network partners as individual partnerships. If you join River Network, you have access to things like our NOSA database of individual donors in a given watershed or a region. We have a lot of different resources and templates that you guys can tie into, and feel free to contact staff for consulting help. And if there are larger projects where we can help you with a longer fee-for-service consulting program, Deanna and I can work with you on that. So want to just encourage people, please join River Network. Try to help each other. You guys have some really great opportunities for synergy between your programs, and building collaborative conservation means really getting out of the box for how we do these things and how these things are funded. And I know that already Lisa has put together the coastal newsletter for a number of you, for a number of the partnerships that are potentially going to be able to work together in the future, looking for joint projects, looking for similar strategies that you might be using is going to be really important to help you make that compelling case for new supporters.
Wendy, this is Katie. Do you think that you could put your slides up on the Basecamp because it had that template on it?
The template itself in more detail is there
Oh, okay.
already. I will put the slides up, but actually it's a 2-page document that just has a little bit more detail and suggestions for questions that you might want to consider including on Basecamp. Yeah. So there also are discussions going on with the National Board next week, I guess, about potentially having some ongoing support for the fish habitat partnerships. We're hoping to follow up this webinar with peer group meetings to follow up on some of these ideas. I'm wondering if other people would like to do that. I know that peer groups have just sort of been meeting. A couple of them have met once or twice. Is this a topic that you guys could use some ongoing support from peers on?
Yeah.
This is Lindsay with SARP, and I definitely think we could benefit from those continued discussions.
We can try to schedule peer group meetings and make this an agenda item. There is talk about, well, could we have another annual get-together? That is something the board will talk about, the possibility of getting support for that as well. And we're also having some conversations about resources for consultants to work directly with fish habitat partnerships in the future. So if people have other consultants they're working with or trainings like the BLM training that is scheduled at the Shepherdstown Training Center for this fall, please share that with folks in the Basecamp as well as in the peer groups.
Mm-hmm.
So is that BLM training announcement through NCTC is in Basecamp?
I think you posted it once. When is that again, though? Just let people know again, Steve.
I believe it's September 17th through the 19th. So it's 3 full days in training, so people who can go and sign up through the NCTC course sign-up process. Of course, you'll need a travel day of the 16th, which is Monday, and Friday, which is the 20th. But the actual training dates are Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, September 17th through 19th.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Steve, what's the name of the training?
Let me send that to you. I can send the training announcement back out, but I think it's grant writing for conservation. But I'll also include a more detailed sheet that describes each of the components of the training, which gets involved in a lot of more than just grant writing. So I think that the name itself kind of leads you into thinking that it's just about being better at writing grants, but it's more encompassing than that.
Okay, thanks.
This is Michelle from the Great Lakes. Kind of relevant to your previous slide there, future organizational needs, and also thinking about the peer groups or kind of the SWAT team support for FHPs. One of the things that would be beneficial for us is something that I know that you all at River Network have been really helpful for me in the past, providing this service, and that's if there are so many things to be done, kind of what do you start with? You know, the position that we're in here in the Great Lakes is one of trying to rejuvenate a partnership that's been a little sleepy for a couple of years. And, you know, what comes first? Without overwhelming people, hey, we need a business plan, and we never really talked about a budget, and we need to kind of revive these committees, and who's going to do what, and we need a work plan. Where I could use a little bit of support is what's the partnership ready for, and what's the next best step right now that'll lead us towards completing some of these kind of larger organizational frameworks that I know we need, but folks haven't been thinking about the partnership for a couple of years. And so, hi, let's do all this work is probably not the best approach. We've got to get them excited first. So that would be a topic that would be of interest to us. And I know you guys are good at that. You're good at always knowing whatever level an organization is at, what's the appropriate next step for that level.
Yeah, you're not exactly at the point where you can say, let's go talk to a banker about getting a loan for investing in our program.
Right, or talking to my steering committee right now about a fundraising plan. They're like, well, wait a minute, what would that be for?
Mm-hmm.
No, I think, as you guys know, fundraising is something that for most people in the conservation community, can be uncomfortable, and you have to really love what you're doing it for and understand the role that has for your greater organization to fully invest in it and be successful. And, so I see that we're certainly a few steps away from that. Doesn't mean that we won't get there, but we have some things to do first.
Well, I think you're talking about, getting started. Writing it down on your own work plan. Okay, you've done that. Start business plan. Starting your own file on our business plan. Doing your budget projections, like Steve was talking about, what we need, and then putting it on your steering committee agenda. Those are good first steps. Asking your partners to participate and doing some outreach about, dreaming what the partnership could look like in the future might be something that your steering committee would be more prepared to do than writing a fundraising plan for projects that they aren't that inspired about right now. So that would be one suggestion, is going with your partners a little bit and asking for some more input about what you guys could be doing. And definitely, we could talk about this more in the peer groups, and I don't know that we're going to get cut off right here at this discussion, but please feel free to raise other questions now, and we'll try to bring them up in the peer groups at least.
Wendy, this is Tom Boozy. I'd just like to give a couple of updates on what's going to happen at the board meeting next week, because it's relevant to this. Anybody can go on the NIFAP website and into the board briefing book, and they'll find tab 6 in there, which is a fairly in-depth analysis of the board moving ahead on establishing a not-for-profit corporation that would be a tool for use by all the fish habitat partnerships. My prediction is that the board will approve moving ahead, and this document gives a lot of detail on what the next steps will be in a phased-in approach to establish a not-for-profit corporation. So I urge people to take a look at that, tab 6 in the board briefing book. Also, there's going to be a briefing to the board on increasing corporate engagement. Chris Horton is a board member who has been tasked with working on this. He has been working with Joe Starnchuk of the Fish and Wildlife Service, and I think there's some, we're still in an exploratory phase, but I think there's going to be some real interesting possibilities that are going to be opening up with the corporate world in the near future, and Joe will talk about that at the board meeting. And then also, Wendy, I'm very glad that you're going to be able to be there through virtually there to talk about some of the long-term development needs of the fish habitat partnerships. I think that'll be a valuable perspective for the board. So there's just some things to take a look at in the board book, and listen in if you're available or can attend the meeting.
Great, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
Looking forward to it. Any other last comments or thoughts people want to share with the group? If not,
Wendy, I did just email you and Robin those announcements and that schedule week at a glance or schedule at a glance. If it's possible to put it on the Basecamp, both those documents, and people can readily access those there for the BLM training.
Okay. Can other people post to Basecamp, or am I the only one that can post files? I hope that's not true.
Well, if I can post, then I can go ahead and do that.
Yeah, I think everybody's got permission from what I can see on it right now.
Great.
All right, I'll post those up there.
Yeah, feel free. Yeah. Okay, guys, thanks so much for participating today, and
Let me just say that once the room closes up
Oh, yeah.
here in a second, the screen, you'll be automatically directed to a very quick and easy eval form. If you could give us some feedback on how this webinar format is working for you and other topics possibly, if you have any, that would be very helpful feedback. So just hang on for a couple of seconds once Ryan closes the room, and your screen will take you there.
great, I forgot that.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Yep,
Thank
talk
you
to
all.
you later.
All right,
Bye-bye.
thank you.